The fluorescent lights were the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes. Bright, humming, the kind that make everything look slightly wrong, like a photograph taken under bad weather. I didn't know where I was for a few seconds. Then the smell hit me. Antiseptic and something sterile and cold. And I felt the IV needle taped to the back of my hand, and I understood. Hospital. My head was pounding. My left shoulder felt like someone had driven a nail through it. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Hey, easy. A nurse appeared at my side, young, with dark curly hair and a name badge I couldn't read from that angle. You were in a pretty bad accident. Just stay still for now. What happened? My voice came out rough, like gravel. A truck ran a red light on Route 9. Your car spun into the guardrail. You've got a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and a concussion. You were unconscious when the paramedics brought you in. I blinked at the ceiling. Route 9. I remembered the rain. I remembered the green light. I remembered the headlights coming from the left, too fast, too wide, and then nothing. Is there someone we should call? She asked. Family? My mother, I said automatically. Her name is Irene Calloway. She lives in Denton. It's about 40 minutes from here. The nurse nodded and made a note. Anyone else? A partner? A sibling? No, just her. She left, and I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains to keep my mind from spinning. The pain in my shoulder was a dull, persistent throb. My name is Tessa. I was 31 years old, working as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Millbrook, living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with a cat named Biscuit and a dying succulent on my kitchen windowsill. My life was not glamorous. It was fine. It was mine. I waited. An hour passed, maybe more. The nurse came back twice to check my vitals. A doctor stopped in, explained my injuries again in more detail, told me I'd need to stay at least 2 nights for observation because of the concussion. He was kind about it. He asked again if anyone was coming. My mother, I said, she should be here soon. But she wasn't. By evening, the other bed in my room had been claimed by an elderly man who slept through everything, and I was alone with a tray of food I couldn't eat and a television I couldn't focus on. I kept looking at the door. I kept thinking I'd hear her voice in the hallway, that particular way she had of talking to strangers like she'd known them for years. Loud and warm and slightly too familiar. She didn't come. My phone had been cracked in the accident but still worked. I called her 3 times. Voicemail each time. I texted. I waited. Nothing. The next morning, a different nurse brought me breakfast and asked, gently, if anyone had come to see me. Not yet, I said. She didn't push it. But I saw the look she exchanged with the aide near the door, and I felt it land somewhere in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. My mother had never once in my life failed to show up for something important. When I had my tonsils out at 9 years old, she slept in the chair beside my bed 2 nights in a row. When I got into a car accident at 19 minor, just a fender bender, she was at the ER before I'd even finished giving them my insurance card. She was that kind of person. Reliable in the way that you stop noticing it. The way you stop noticing that the sun rises every morning. So why wasn't she here? I called my aunt in Columbus, my mother's older sister. She answered on the second ring. Tessa? Honey, what's wrong? I explained. There was a pause on the other end that I didn't know how to read. I'll try to reach her, my aunt said. Stay put. I'll call you back. She called back 40 minutes later. Her voice was different. Careful. I spoke to her, my aunt said. She knows you're there. I let that sit for a second. And, another pause, she said she needs some time. She's dealing with something, Tessa. I don't really know how to explain it. Just focus on getting better, okay? I can drive up tomorrow if you need me. I thanked her and hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. She knew I was there. She knew, and she hadn't come. On the 3rd day, a woman appeared in my doorway wearing a hospital ID badge and a neutral expression that I'd come to associate with people who were about to say something complicated. She introduced herself as the hospital's patient advocate. Do you have a few minutes? She asked. I gestured at the room. I'm not going anywhere. She sat down in the chair beside my bed and folded her hands in her lap. So, standard procedure for unaccompanied patients in extended care, especially with a concussion, is to run a few additional checks, blood panel, some routine screening. We also ran a preliminary ID verification because your insurance card had some discrepancies. I frowned. What kind of discrepancies? Your social security number came back flagged. It's not fraudulent exactly, but it raised some questions on our end. We followed up with the state records office. She paused. And that prompted us to contact the Millbrook police, just as a precaution. The police? I sat up too fast and immediately winced. Why would you contact the police over an insurance discrepancy? She looked at me with something I can only describe as careful compassion. The officer who responded would like to speak with you directly. He's outside. Is that okay? I said yes, mostly because I didn't know what else to say. The officer was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had probably once been open and was now just professionally neutral. He introduced himself and pulled the chair a little closer to the bed and sat down like he was settling in for a conversation that might take a while. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you because I think you deserve that. The flag on your social security number. When we ran it, we found that the number was assigned to a child in 1993 who died at 14 months old. The name on the original record is not Tessa Calloway." I heard the words. I understood each one individually, but they didn't arrange themselves into meaning right away. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" "The identity you've been using, the one your mother registered you under, doesn't match any birth certificate we can verify as original. We cross-referenced with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children." He paused. "There's a case. A little girl who disappeared from Carver County, Tennessee in 1994. She was 22 months old." He paused again, longer this time. "The physical description matches. The approximate age matches. The approximate age matches. And when we ran a preliminary DNA comparison using the sample from your blood panel, you ran my DNA," I said. "It's part of the protocol when we have reason to believe." He stopped. Started again. "Ms. Calloway, there's a family in Tennessee that has been looking for their daughter for 30 years. The room went very quiet. The heart monitor beeped. The man in the next bed snored softly. "That's not possible," I said, because it was the only thing I could think to say. "I understand this is a shock. I want to be very clear, nothing is confirmed yet. The preliminary match is significant, but we'll need a formal DNA test with a sample from the biological family before anything is official. That process takes time, and you have every right to—" "Who are they?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "The father's name is Ronald Mead. He owns a construction company in Carver County. He and his wife, her name is Barbara, reported their daughter missing from their front yard in June of 1994. The daughter's name was Elaine." I said the name quietly, just to hear what it sounded like. It didn't feel like mine. But then again, I'd had 30 years to feel like Tessa. "Where is my—" I stopped. Tried again. "Where is Irene Calloway?" He looked down at his notepad. "We contacted her this morning. She's been informed of the situation." "Is she coming?" The pause told me everything. "She invoked her right to an attorney," he said. "She's not speaking to us at this time." They discharged me 4 days later with a sling for my shoulder, a prescription for the pain, and the name of a victim's advocate who had called me twice already to check in. I went back to my apartment. I fed Biscuit. I sat on my couch and looked at the walls of a life I had built around a name that might not have ever been mine. My aunt called every day. She didn't have answers, but she called. That meant something. The formal DNA results came back 17 days after the accident. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold when the advocate called. "Tessa," she said carefully, "the results are back." I already knew from her tone. "Tell me, it's a match. A 99.97% probability of parentage with both Ronald and Barbara Mead." I put the coffee cup down very slowly. "Okay," I said. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet." She gave me time. She was good at that. Then she told me that the Meads had been informed, that they had asked if I would be willing to speak with them, that there was no pressure, that I could take as much time as I needed. She said it the way people say things when they know the weight of what they're handing you. I asked her one question. "Did they ever stop looking?" She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. They never stopped. I said I needed a few days. She said she understood. I spent those days going through everything I could find about myself. My birth certificate, which I'd had my whole life, had used for my passport, my driver's license, my FAFSA applications, now had the shadow of a question mark behind every letter. I went through old photos. I found one of me at maybe 2 or 3 years old, sitting on a porch somewhere I didn't recognize, squinting into the sun. I'd always thought it was taken at Irene's sister's house in Kentucky. Now I didn't know. I thought about everything I remembered about my childhood. The way Irene used to get tense whenever I asked about my father. She told me he'd left before I was born, that there was nothing to say about him. I'd accepted it the way kids accept things, completely, without question, filing it under just the way things are. I thought about the time she'd moved us suddenly, twice before I was 7, always with some explanation about a new job or cheaper rent. I thought about how she'd homeschooled me until I was 9. How she'd been insistent about it in a way I could now hear differently. I thought about how she'd always seemed slightly afraid of something I couldn't name. I thought about all of it until the shape of it made me sick. On a Thursday morning, 10 days after the DNA results, I called the number the advocate had given me. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was low and warm and slightly hoarse, like someone who had spent a long time not quite sleeping. "Hello," she said. "This is Tessa," I said. And then, because I didn't know what else to say, I was told you'd been looking for me. There was a sound on the other end of the line that I don't have the right words for. It was somewhere between a gasp and a sob and something quieter than either of those things. "We have been," the woman said. "We have been looking for you since the day you disappeared." Her name was Barbara, but she asked me to call her whatever felt comfortable. Her husband, Ronald, was there too. She put me on speaker after a few minutes. He barely spoke at first. I could just hear him breathing, and occasionally a sound like he was clearing his throat, and once I thought I heard him say my name, not Tessa, the other one, very quietly, like he was just testing whether it was real. We talked for 2 hours that first call. They told me what they remembered. June 4th, 1994. I'd been playing in the front yard while Barbara was inside making lunch. She'd checked on me maybe 8 minutes before. When she came out, I was gone. They'd searched the yard, the neighbors' yards, the street. Ronald had driven every road within a mile. They'd called the police within 20 minutes of realizing something was wrong. "We never thought you were dead," Barbara said. I know that sounds like something people say, but I genuinely never believed it. I couldn't. "What made you think I was still alive?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. There was a woman. A neighbor saw her earlier that day watching the yard. Nobody thought anything of it at the time. A woman with dark hair driving a beige station wagon. She paused. We gave that description to every law enforcement agency we could reach, for years, but nothing ever came back. I thought about Irene's hair, always dyed but naturally dark. I thought about a photograph I'd once seen in a box in her closet before she moved us the second time. A woman standing next to a beige car. I'd asked about it once. She'd changed the subject. I told them I needed to meet them in person before I could process any of this properly. They said yes immediately, yes, whatever I needed, whenever I was ready. I drove to Carver County, Tennessee 3 weeks after that call. It took me 8 hours. I stopped twice. I sat in the gas station parking lot outside of Knoxville for 45 minutes just staring at the highway. When I pulled up to the house, it was smaller than I'd imagined, but well kept, white with green shutters, a wide porch with 2 rocking chairs and a hanging basket of ferns. Ronald was on the porch when I pulled up. He was a big man, early 60s, with white hair and the kind of hands that spoke to decades of physical work. He stood up when he saw my car and just stood there, watching me park, watching me get out, watching me walk up the path. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Barbara came to the screen door and stopped at the edge of the porch, one hand pressed over her mouth. She was small, with gray blonde hair pulled back, and her eyes were the same shape as mine. I hadn't seen it in any of the photos they'd sent, but in person, standing 10 feet apart, it was immediately obvious. "Hi," I said, because I am extraordinarily bad at the important moments of my own life. Barbara made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and came down the porch steps and hugged me. She smelled like dish soap and something floral, and she held on like she was afraid I'd disappear again if she let go. I didn't pull away. After a second, I put my arms around her too. Ronald put his hand on my shoulder, gently, careful of the sling, and said, "We're glad you're here." We sat on that porch for a long time. They showed me photos. One of me as an infant, grinning with no teeth yet, held up by a much younger Ronald in what I recognize now as that same front yard. One of Barbara, visibly pregnant, standing in a nursery painted pale yellow with small white stars stenciled along the border near the ceiling. "Is the nursery still there?" I asked, without really planning to. Barbara looked at me and Ronald looked at her, and she nodded. "We painted over the stars when you were 3, she said. But last year, I don't know why, I just felt like I needed to. I stenciled them back." I had to look away for a second. Inside the house, they had kept a box. It was a regular cardboard box, the kind you'd use for moving, but it had been taped and retaped so many times that the original tape was just a ghost beneath the newer layers. Inside was everything. The police reports from 1994, the correspondence with the FBI, the flyers they printed and distributed in 6 states, a notebook where Barbara had recorded every tip, every lead, every dead end. There were 30 years of hope compressed into that box, and it smelled faintly of old paper and something else I couldn't name but that made my throat tighten. "You never filed to have the case closed," I said. "No," Ronald said. "I wouldn't allow it." Dinner that evening was pot roast with potatoes, the kind of meal that takes hours and means something. We ate at a wooden table in a kitchen that had clearly been the heart of the house for decades, and I learned small things: that Barbara played bridge on Tuesday evenings, that Ronald had recently started woodworking in the garage, that they had a son, their other child, my brother, who lived in Nashville and was flying in the next morning specifically to meet me. I learned that they had never moved. They'd stayed in the same house all 30 years because they were afraid that if they moved, I wouldn't know where to find them if I ever came back. That broke something open in me that I hadn't known was sealed. I stayed in their guest room that night. The sheets were soft and the room smelled like cedar, and I could hear the sound of a ceiling fan turning slowly in the hallway. I lay awake for a while, looking at the ceiling, thinking about all the versions of my life that had existed simultaneously without my knowledge. The Elaine who should have grown up in this house. The Tessa who had no idea that somewhere in Tennessee a mother had stenciled stars back onto a nursery wall. In the morning, my brother arrived. He was 34, 2 years older than me, and when he walked in the door and saw me at the kitchen table, he stopped and stared in the same way his father had the day before, like he was checking to make sure I was real. "You look like Mom," he said. "Around the eyes." "I know," I said. He sat down across from me and we talked for 3 hours like we'd been waiting to have the conversation our whole lives, which I suppose, in a way, we had. Irene's case had moved quickly, partly because of the DNA evidence and partly because the FBI had gotten involved once the case was confirmed as an interstate kidnapping. I'd given a full statement. My aunt, to her credit, had done the same. She'd always known, she told investigators. Not the full truth, but enough to suspect. Irene had told her once, years ago, something she'd dismissed as a confession made in a moment of darkness. She'd spent 30 years not knowing what to do with it. I understood that, even as it hurt. Irene was charged with kidnapping and several related counts. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case was ongoing, and I had been told I would likely need to testify. I'd said I would. I didn't know how I felt about it yet. About sitting in a courtroom and looking at the woman who had raised me, who had made me grilled cheese sandwiches and helped me through the SATs and cried at my college graduation. I wasn't ready to call what she'd done a kindness, but I also wasn't ready to call her nothing to me. The truth is both things can be true at once, and nobody warns you about that. 3 months after the accident, I went back to Carver County for a long weekend. Barbara and I had started talking on the phone every few days. She'd call on Sunday evenings mostly, asking about small things, how Biscuit was doing, whether my shoulder was fully healed, whether I'd tried the recipe she'd texted me for lemon chicken. Ronald emailed, which I found unexpectedly charming. His emails were brief and slightly formal, like letters, and they always ended the same way. Glad you're well. Dad. The first time I saw that, I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. That weekend, Barbara took me to the yard. It was late afternoon, the light going golden sideways through the trees, and she stood beside me on the grass and didn't say anything for a while. Then, she pointed to a spot near the old oak at the corner of the lot. That's where you were playing, she said. You had a red bucket. You were digging. I looked at the spot. The oak was bigger now, of course, 30 years of growth, but I tried to picture it smaller. Tried to picture a yard with a toddler in it. Red bucket, June sunlight. I'm sorry I wasn't here, I said, which I knew wasn't the right way to say it, but I didn't have better words. Barbara shook her head. That wasn't yours to be sorry for, she said. You were 22 months old. We stood there a little longer. A bird called from somewhere in the oak, the light shifted, and then she reached over and took my hand. Not dramatically, not as a moment, just like it was the most natural thing in the world, like something that had always been true finally expressing itself. And we stood there together, in the yard where I had last been her daughter 30 years ago, until the light faded and it was time to go inside. I'm still figuring out what my life looks like from here. I still live in my apartment in Millbrook. I'm still a paralegal. Biscuit is still losing the battle with the succulent. Some things are exactly the same, but some things are different in ways I don't have language for yet. When I fill out a form now and it asks for my name, there's a beat of hesitation, not because I don't know who I am, but because I'm learning that identity is something you carry forward, not something that stays still while you catch up to it. I've started signing things Tessa Mead. It felt strange the first time. Then it felt like something settling into place. And sometimes on Sunday evenings, when my phone rings and I see it's Barbara, I pick up before the second ring and the first thing she says is just my name. My whole name, the one I was born with and the one I chose, and somehow that's enough. That's everything. I keep thinking about that cardboard box, the one Ronald and Barbara kept in their house for 30 years, taped and retaped, filled with police reports and dead-end leads and handwritten notes that Barbara made every time a tip came in. That box existed while I was growing up in another state, while I was taking my SATs, while I was signing a lease on my first apartment. That box sat in a closet in Tennessee, and I had no idea it existed. No idea that someone was keeping count of every year I was missing. That's the thing about consequences. They don't always announce themselves. Irene made a choice in June of 1994 in a neighborhood she didn't belong to, and she spent the next 3 decades building a life on top of it. She taught me to ride a bike. She came to my college graduation. She also made sure we moved twice before I was 7, kept me out of school long enough that no one would ask too many questions, and flinched whenever I asked about my past. Every single thing she did to protect the lie was also a choice. Choices compound. They don't stay still, and eventually the truth doesn't either. What I've had to sit with, what I'm still sitting with, is that intelligence alone doesn't protect you from living inside a false story. I was a paralegal. I spent my working hours parsing documents for inconsistencies, reading between the lines of affidavits, catching the small details that didn't line up, and I had no idea. Because the story I'd been given was the only reference point I had. You can be sharp, careful, observant, and still be deceived, if the person doing the deceiving had 30 years of practice and loved you enough to be convincing about it. What actually cracked it open wasn't anything I did. It was a flagged social security number. A routine check. The kind of thing that happens in the background of ordinary bureaucracy. Which tells me that you can outrun a lot of things for a long time, but the systems designed to track truth are patient in a way that individual people aren't. I think about Barbara stenciling those stars back onto the nursery wall last year. She said she didn't know why she felt compelled to do it. I think I know why. 30 years of not giving up does something to a person. It keeps the heart from closing all the way over the wound. It takes a particular kind of strength to stay open that long, to resist the easier thing, which would have been to grieve and seal and move forward. She and Ronald chose over and over again not to accept an ending that hadn't actually happened. That's the thing I want to remember more than anything else from this. Not the shock of the DNA results. Not the surreal quality of that first phone call. Not even the moment on the porch when Barbara came down the steps and held on. What I want to remember is the decision, repeated across 30 years, to keep the record accurate, to not let a lie become the official story just because it was easier. I'm still figuring out who I am inside all of this, but I know that the person I want to be is someone who, when it matters, tells the truth, even when the truth is complicated. Someone who doesn't seal the box just because it's heavy. Someone who stencils the stars back. That's the only version of this story I want to carry forward.